And before I talk too much about the specifics of the program, I usually like to address kind of why there's a program in the first place and what it's all about. And it really has to do with the issue of climate change and the concern for CO2, especially in the atmosphere, which is one of the greenhouse gases that they are concerned about causing global warming. If you remember your science class, you may recall that plants, through photosynthesis, take in carbon dioxide, convert it to leaves, stems, roots, seeds. As they die off and break down, that carbon goes back off into the atmosphere. And the same thing happens in the ocean. So those blue lines represent the natural carbon cycle. The red lines then represent how man has interfered in that cycle, either through changing land use or, more importantly, the burning of fossil fuels. We're not here to talk about global warming, whether it exists, whether it's man-caused, but just to give you a little background of why there's a program in the first place. But one of the ways to reduce the emissions in the atmosphere is through what they call carbon sequestration. Basically, it's the capture and storage of carbon that would otherwise be in the atmosphere. This program deals with agricultural carbon sequestration, and we're really talking specifically about the organic matter in the soil, that dead and decomposed in various states of plant material, animal material in the soil. So depending on how that soil is managed, it can either be a source losing carbon to the atmosphere, or a sink gaining carbon, depending on the practices. If I had one slide to show kind of what the carbon credit program is about, it'd probably be this one. That is, that soil is tilled and oxygen has a good chance to get down into that soil. It breaks down that organic matter and goes off into the atmosphere. This is a slide put together by Don Rakowski, a soil scientist from Morris, Minnesota. So what exactly is a carbon credit? It involves really two things: reducing the amount of carbon leaving the soil, in our case, and then doing something to remove it. And again, in our case, it's growing crops, grasses, various other plants. Certain tillage practices that help keep that carbon in the soil and not allow it to release, that's where the carbon credit can be earned. These then are sold on a market called the Chicago Climate Exchange. The Chicago Climate Exchange is a market just like a livestock market or a grain market. It's a place that brings the buyers and sellers of greenhouse gases together in the marketplace. Their other role, though, is they're also the ones that set the rules for the program we're involved in. So they set the rules. They see that the rules are followed. They're responsible for the compliance, and then they're the market. Who might be buying the carbon credits? Well, in the most part, it's companies that have voluntarily joined the Chicago Climate Exchange and have agreed to reduce their emissions a certain percent each year. Again, it's all voluntary, both on our side and right now, because there's no legal emission standards, climate change legislation adopted in the U.S. Currently, it's an all-volunteer program. But if once they join on, they do sign a legally binding contract. So after a given year, they do an assessment. If they didn't reach that goal, they were required to, then they need to go into the market and buy offsetting credits for their excess emissions. If they were able to reduce their emissions more than they needed to, then they also have excess credits that they could go in and sell on the market. And where this program then comes in is through the agricultural carbon sequestration program that farmers can earn using certain tillage and management practices to earn the credits. It's not about business as usual practices. You don't get credit for your normal practices that you maybe have been doing all along. You have to be doing something above and beyond in order to earn that, to store that extra credit to earn the carbon credit. There are 5 different programs that producers can earn carbon credits on. There's credit for conservation tillage, which basically is a no-till program, and as a part of that includes alfalfa. There's a program for new grass conversion, where you've had cropland, you've seeded back to grass. CRP fits into that category as well. You can earn carbon credits for rangeland management that uses practices that increase the growth of that grass. There's also a plan for shelter belts and trees. Within certain limitations, you can earn credits, and you can earn credits for methane capture. We'll talk about the no-till program first. As far as no-till, they have a general rule of thumb is no more than 1/3 of the soil can be disturbed in any seeding practice. They do allow strip tilling, again based on that 1/3 rule. And again, it has to be a continuous no-till through the contract. So if you're no-tilling one year and the next not, it won't work in this program. Specific practices, crops have to be grown annually. If there's no photosynthesis taking place, there's no carbon being sequestered. Soybeans can only be seeded half the time during that contract period. You're not allowed to fallow it. And they have a restriction on how much residue you can remove. An example maybe would be if you had corn and you cut it for silage, removed pretty much all of the residue, you wouldn't earn a credit that year. If you harvested it and turned the cows out to graze the stalks, that's not a problem. They allow that. So there's a little bit of different leeway. We've even asked, well, what if it was a dry year and you needed extra feed and you baled up the stalks or the stubble or the straw? That would be allowed not on an annual ongoing basis, but if it was needed 1 year out of the 5, that would probably be allowed. They have specific implements that they allow. Any planter or drill that doesn't disturb more than 1/3 of the soil. And they do allow subsurface implements. They also allow what they call a rolling harrow. They also have a list that's not acceptable, and those are all those that disturb too much of the soil to fit into this program. The harrow is a little questionable. They do allow limited harrowing. Again, if you had cropland that you've planted alfalfa and are haying it, it's considered part of the no-till program, gets the same rate. In that case, though, you are, of course, allowed to remove the residue. The only thing, if you've got alfalfa and you sign a 5-year contract, you'd have to, and you decide to farm it within that period, you'd have to use no-till practices within that contract. So, in summary, what if I would want to enroll some of my cropland in the no-till program? What am I agreeing to do? You're basically agreeing to continuous no-till, any of those enrolled crops through the year 2013. It's a 5-year contract. The second one is they call long-term seeded grass. For the most part, CRP is about the only thing that fits in it. It's got to be considered cropland. They have a limitation on the seeding date. It has to have been planted or seeded after January 1999. This rule probably is going to be changed next year, and they're going to allow older seeded CRP in, but it won't be before our pool close here. And again, it's a 5-year contract. Now, there is a way if you had a CRP contract that came out within the 5-year contract, and we're going to farm it, it could be done as long as you no-tilled. The rates that you get for no-till, they vary around the country. You see in South Dakota there's 2 different rates. The eastern part of the state gets a higher rate, and it's 0.6 of a ton per acre per year. The rest of the state gets 0.4 of a ton. The seeded grass or CRP type gets a credit of 1 ton per acre per year. Now, that doesn't mean anything until you know what the price of those tons are worth, and it's a market that goes up and down every day.